Hello there. God's peace to you. My name's Peter, and I'm 74 now. And I've lived long enough to know that not all prayers are answered when we want, and not all blessings come when we expect. There were years, honest years, when I thought God had forgotten me. I'd see others moving ahead, receiving answers, finding joy, while I stayed in the quiet place, waiting, watching, wondering if maybe I had missed my moment. But now, with silver in my hair and time etched across my hands, I see things differently. There's a kind of clarity that only comes with age, a deeper wisdom that whispers, God was never late. He was just preparing you for something your younger self couldn't yet carry. And that's what I want to share with you today. Why some of God's most beautiful blessings are reserved for our gray-haired years. So stay with me, and if this speaks to your heart, I'd love for you to like this video and subscribe so we can walk through these truths together. Because what's coming isn't just delayed, it's divine. Would you like me to move into thematic point 1 now, beginning with a soft reflective opening and story? There's a kind of blessing that doesn't look like a gift at first. It comes wrapped in silence, delay, or even disappointment. And only later, years later, do we realize what it truly was. I believe that's why God sometimes waits until our hair turns gray to reveal certain things. Not to punish us, but to prepare us. Because some truths are too heavy for young shoulders, and some miracles take time to grow deep enough roots. When I was 42, I prayed for a door to open. It didn't. I prayed again at 50, and again, nothing. I thought maybe God had closed that chapter for good. I moved on, at least I thought I did. But at 67, something changed. The very dream I had tucked away, the one I had grieved, suddenly returned, not as I imagined, but better, more whole. And the strange thing is, I was finally ready for it. If it had come when I first asked, I would have mishandled it, or turned it into something selfish. But after walking with God through loss, patience, and quiet trust, I could receive it with reverence. That's when I understood some blessings are not delayed, they're just waiting for us to grow into them. So if you've ever felt like your season has passed, or your prayer has been shelved, stay with me. And if this message is already stirring something inside you, I'd love for you to like this video and subscribe. There's more ahead that I don't want you to miss. I once heard someone say that God is not in a hurry, but He's always on time. That's easier to say when you're not the one waiting. But the truth is, every year we live with faith becomes a layer of wisdom, a deeper well God can draw from. And sometimes the longer the wait, the richer the reward. Take Mr. Elias, a retired school principal I met at a church gathering. He told me he always dreamed of writing books, but life swept him into leadership and responsibility. For decades, he shelved his passion. Then, after turning 73, with his children grown and his calendar quiet, he finally sat down to write. And what came out wasn't just information, it was wisdom, soaked in experience and softened by grace. His first book touched hundreds. He told me, I thought God had passed me by, but really, He was storing up the blessing until I could give it to others without ego. Psalm 71:18 says, And even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, my God, till I declare your power to the next generation. Maybe God waits not because we're forgotten, but because our voice, matured by time, will carry more weight when the moment finally arrives. When people think of blessings, they often picture immediate answers, open doors, and sudden miracles. But there's a quieter kind of blessing that God gives us in the silence. It is the kind that does not make headlines, but it shapes the soul. And more often than not, it comes wrapped in what feels like delay. I remember those long nights when I would sit on the back porch looking up at the stars, wondering if God still heard me. My wife had passed us 2 years before, and the loneliness settled in like fog that would not lift. I prayed for comfort, for direction, for something that would make it all make sense again. But heaven stayed quiet. For a time, I thought maybe I had done something wrong. Maybe I had reached the point in life when God stopped using people like me. But something began to shift. Not in the circumstances, but in me. The silence became a sanctuary. The waiting turned into a classroom. I was no longer trying to fix the pain. I was learning to sit with it. And in that stillness, I discovered something I had never seen when life was full of noise. I was not alone. God was there in the quiet. He had always had been. There is a story I will never forget about a woman named Dona Elzira. She was 89 years old and had lived most of her life caring for others. A mother, a widow, and then a caregiver for her sister. She gave her whole life in service, but yet she said she never felt like she had truly been seen. One day, during a church prayer service, she shared her testimony. Her voice trembled, but her eyes sparkled. She said, "I used to wonder why God never gave me a stage or a ministry, but now I see that my kitchen was my altar, and every meal I made was worship. He was building something sacred in my silence." That hit me deep. Sometimes we are asking for the visible fruit, while God is working on our invisible roots. It takes strength to wait. It takes faith to remain when there is no spotlight, no applause, just daily trust. But that is often where the deepest kind of transformation happens, not in the great acts, but in the small, unseen choices made in faith.
Isaiah 46, verse 4, reminds us of this truth. It says, "Even to your old age and gray hairs, I am He. I am He who will sustain you. I have made you, and I will carry you. I will sustain you, and I will rescue you." Not once in that verse does God mention our ability. He only promises His presence. And sometimes, the greatest blessing is not a change in circumstances, but the quiet knowledge that we are carried. When we are young, pain often feels like punishment. We cry out, asking why, looking for a way out. But over time, when we walk long enough with God, we begin to see pain differently, not as a wall, but as a doorway. Not something to escape, but something that, when held in God's hands, can become the very place where healing begins. I never thought I would become the kind of man who counsels others through grief. But after my wife died, people started coming to me. Not because I had the right words, but because I had lived it. I remember one man, a widower in his 60s named Carl. He came to a support group I was helping lead at the church. He had just lost his wife of 42 years. His hands were shaking as he told us how empty the house felt, how strange it was to make coffee for one. I did not give him advice. I just looked him in the eyes and said, "I know." And we sat there, two old men, quiet in our sorrow, but not alone. That was the moment I understood something I had not seen in the earlier years. God does not waste pain. When we give it back to Him, He turns it into ministry. Not the stage and microphone kind of ministry, but the quiet, powerful kind. The kind that happens in kitchens and hospital waiting rooms and grocery store aisles when someone says they're barely holding on, and we can say, "I have been there, and I am still here." One of the great lies we are tempted to believe in our later years is that we are no longer useful, that our story is over, our impact has passed. But the truth is, the longer we live, the more chapters God can use. And often, it's the chapters written in tears that speak the loudest to those who are still in the storm. There is a verse in 2 Corinthians 1 that says, God comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves received from God. I used to think I had nothing left to give, but I have learned that comfort offered from a place of real experience carries a weight that no sermon ever could. Let me tell you about Estella, a woman from our community who battled cancer for years. She once said something that still echoes in my heart. She said, I used to pray for healing. Now I pray to be a healing presence. That is a prayer only someone who has suffered can truly pray. And God answered it. She became a pillar of strength for others who were afraid, not by pretending to be strong, but by showing up with her scarred, faithful heart still open. So if you were carrying pain from years past, do not assume it was pointless. That pain may become someone else's lifeline. The very thing you thought disqualified you might be the reason someone else finds their way back to hope. There is something sacred about the callings that come with age. When we are young, we often serve out of energy, ambition, or even the desire to prove ourselves. But when we are older, we serve out of wisdom, experience, and love refined by fire. That is when God can trust us with deeper things, not just roles, but callings, not just opportunities, but legacy. I used to think calling was something that happened once, that you found your purpose early, walked in it, and then slowly faded into the background. But now, I know better. Now, I believe that some callings are so significant, so weighty with eternal purpose, that God waits until we are older to entrust them to us. Think of Moses. He wasn't a young man when God called him from the burning bush. He was 80. He had been through exile, failure, and a lifetime of waiting. And only then did God say, "Now you are ready." I wonder if Moses, like so many of us, thought his time had passed. But it had not. His greatest assignment came with gray hair and a walking stick. I felt something similar in my own journey. For decades, I worked in business. I provided, I planned, I pushed forward, but I always sensed there was something more, something I couldn't name. Then in my early 70s, I was invited to speak to a group of young men who were struggling to find direction. I almost said no. I felt too old, too out of touch. But something in me nudged me forward, and when I spoke, something clicked. Not because I was clever, but because I was real. I shared my mistakes, my regrets, my turning points, and the room went quiet. Later, one of them said, "That was the first time I believed God could still use someone like me." That moment changed me. Not because it made me feel important, but because it made me realize that all my years had been leading to that moment. Every lesson, every failure, every unanswered prayer had been part of the shaping. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says, "He has made everything beautiful in its time." That includes your calling. That includes your story. And that includes the moment when your voice, your wisdom, your presence becomes a light to someone else. I think of Simeon in the Bible, who waited his entire life to see the Messiah. When he finally held the baby Jesus in his arms, he did not ask for more years or greater status. He simply said, "Now I can depart in peace." That is the power of the calling fulfilled in the later years. It doesn't scream, it doesn't rush, it arrives quietly, full of meaning, and leaves behind a ripple that stretches into eternity. And that leads us into the final truth, the one that ties everything together, a truth that reveals why God may have chosen to wait until now to unfold your greatest blessing.
Not all blessings are meant to be kept. Some are meant to be passed on, like heirlooms, like seeds planted in the heart of someone else. And I believe that is one reason God sometimes waits to reveal them until we are older. Because He knows that by then we will not hoard them. We will give them freely, as legacy. You see, something shifts in the soul with time. When we are younger, we often want blessings to validate us. But with age, our hearts begin to want something more. Not applause, not recognition, but impact. Eternal impact. We start asking questions like, who will carry this forward? What will I leave behind? And that is the moment when God often opens His hand and places something eternal in ours. Let me tell you about Harold, a man from our community who lived into his late 80s. He was never famous, never wealthy. He worked as a janitor most of his life. But in his final years, he began gathering young boys from the neighborhood to teach them how to pray. Nothing formal, no titles, just simple afternoons on his porch, reading scripture and listening to their struggles. Years later, one of those boys became a pastor. Another became a counselor. A third returned to care for Harold in his last days. Before he passed, Harold said to me, "I used to think my life was small, but now I see that God was saving the best part for last." That is the kind of blessing that lasts, the kind that outlives us, the kind that carries the fingerprint of God, because it is not about us at all. It is about the next generation, about the ones watching us, quietly wondering if faith still matters after 70. Psalm 71:18 says it plainly, "Even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, my God, till I declare your power to the next generation." That is a prayer not just for endurance, but for purpose, for usefulness, for legacy. And I believe that is why God waits. Because when the blessing finally arrives, we are no longer looking to consume it. We are ready to declare it. So if this message has touched something in you, I invite you now to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need this reminder. And if you feel led, leave a comment below with the word legacy, so others know they are not alone in this journey. Because you are not. You are part of a story still unfolding, and some of the most beautiful chapters are written in these later pages. The sun always moves slower near the horizon, but it shines with deeper color and softer warmth. In the same way, the light of your life is not fading. It is maturing, ripening, becoming the kind of light that comforts others, that guides without demanding, that whispers of heaven. Maybe you have waited long. Maybe you have wept in silence, but none of it has been wasted. The years, the tears, the prayers still unanswered, they have all been gathered in the hands of a God who sees the whole story. And He writes with eternity in mind. So do not be afraid of the gray in your hair or the years behind you. You are not running out of time. You are arriving at the time that matters most. I'm so grateful we shared this moment together. I hope you will come back, sit with me again, and reflect on more of God's wisdom for these sacred years. Until then, may you rest in His timing, walk in His peace, and never forget, the blessing is still coming.